Thank you all for coming. And we have a great big crowd in here. I just turned the AC down, so hopefully it won't get too warm. I will start a brief introduction once we get the presentation rolling up here and introduce the panelists. But today's talk will be on 3 different JavaScript frameworks, Ember.js, Backbone.js, and AngularJS. So hang on one sec, and we'll, are we close? Yeah, connect right on. So first we'll do some just brief introductions on our panelists for today. First, we've got Tom Wilson, Chief Technologist at Jack Russell, hacking since age 9, passion for teaching, learning, and pretty much everything code. Very active in the community, conferences, events, workshops. I don't think I can think of one thing that you aren't a part of in Charleston, so I couldn't even start to list it. But Tom Wilson here for Ember, and also probably an expert on the rest of the frameworks as well.
I don't know about that.
At least Angular, because he teaches Angular here at Code Camp as well. Then we got Jason Finney-Frock, better known as Frock. Been coding since the late 90s. He original at Boomtown as the number 3 and has never looked back since. Though I don't think he has. Currently happily slinging PHP and front-end code, and one of the best last names in the industry. And third, we have Mark Funk. He's also a software developer over at Boomtown, tied with Frock for the best last name in the industry. Wrote pro wrestling simulators with QBasic in the 6th grade. And so I have to ask, because you presented, who would win between Macho Man, Randy Savage, and Hulk Hogan?
Hulk Hogan all the way. My simulators told me several times.
It's awesome. And been to the beach at least twice. And your moderator for this session is Chad Cravens. That was the actual picture that turned into the cartoon. Founder of Open Source Systems, resident here at the flagship, tech director of Code Camp now for a couple months, and he's really a jack of all trades and a master of many. Mm-hmm. I'm going to be kind to you when you say master of none. You've mastered many as well. So what are we here for today? We're here obviously for the Ember, Backbone, and Angular. We'll start, so the presenters have, or the panelists have a few slides on each one, and I'll start with Tom, and we'll just pop through a couple of your slides on Ember just as a brief introduction. Open. Oh, that's great.
Go to the new window.
I just put it in.
Which one are we opening?
Tom's slides.
We don't have to be difficult.
I love Microsoft Office.
Talk amongst yourselves. Or Tom, why don't you start and I'll get your slides up here. And
Yeah, I can go ahead and start the moderation.
Yeah.
All right, so today we have AngularJS versus Ember versus Backbone. Okay, so if you all aren't familiar with what these are what are called JavaScript frameworks. They're client side. As the web progresses and as technology enhances, really kind of what we're seeing as a trend in the web is we're seeing a lot of what was taken care of by back-end server code now kind of moving more client side. So really that kind of separation between client and server is kind of melding. And these front-end frameworks are really becoming very kind of really established in terms of being able to do more complex things and automate a lot of that stuff, making it very easy and making your web apps work. And so we're going to discuss those front-end frameworks today. And I think first we're going to start with Ember and Tom.
All right, thanks, Chad. How many of you guys have used a front-end framework in production? Okay, about half the room. So one term I may use is SPA, or single page application. And what that means is that all of the code is literally on a single page, and you run the application through that versus a non-front-end framework application, which is server-side, so every page delivers code from the server. Ember is designed to help developers build ambitiously large applications. So it's probably one of the largest frameworks out there, and it was put together purely in the open source community from a spinoff of Sprout Core. And I don't know if you guys remember Sprout Core, but it was designed by Apple back when Apple launched the Mobile Me. Was it the Mobile Me?
Mm-hmm.
Was driven by Sprout Core, and then Tom Dell and Yehuda Katz got together and spun into Ember.js. Ember's main philosophy is to work in concert with what makes the web special. And what makes the web special, in Ember's opinion, is the ability to use URLs to get to places, and the ability to bookmark URLs and go back to that place. Most single-page apps, not all of them, but most of them don't really have that concept of URL-driven data binding. Ember puts that at the foremost front of its framework. And let's see.
So Tom, when you say single page app, what do you mean by that?
So in HTTP, when you go to a website and you request a web page, it downloads an HTML document. That HTML document is usually referred to as a page, right? And in that page, you may have links to resources like pictures or styles or JavaScript. So traditionally, server-side applications would download a page and it would be just a login screen. Then you would enter your login and hit submit. It would go back up to the server, pass your information up to the server, generate a new page, and serve that to you. So that's sort of server-side application development. Single page basically pushes all of the application logic down to your browser in one call, right? Once you have everything loaded, then your application is all literally on the client. And you can do things, and you're only communicating data back and forth.
So you're saying by putting in a different URL, it doesn't necessarily generate an entire new page.
That's correct.
Interesting.
Yep. So you'll notice, like especially on sites like Twitter and other sites that have single-page applications, you'll notice a hash tag in the URL, and that's preventing the request to go all the way up to the server and go to the client-side code and then request the data from the server. So the code is actually on the client.
Cool. Now so I guess you would call that routing, client-side routing?
That's client-side routing.
Okay.
That's correct.
Now does Angular and Backbone, how do they, pair up to that? Do they also offer client-side routing in the framework?
Yep. Angular has their own, and there's a big client, a big community one that's been built there, based centered around. So.
Okay.
Same with Backbone.
Okay.
Core piece.
Would you guys say that's one of the core concepts of client-side frameworks?
I mean, usually, and I'll talk about how it's a little bit different with Backbone, but I think so, by and large.
Yeah, so the core concepts of Angular are Ember. Ember is the model, which is your data, and then the route, which is the direction or path of your request, and then the controller, which really handles all the logic to drive the presentation. And then you have the view and template. The template is the HTML DOM representation. The view is the JavaScript code representation of your presentation. So really, you have your model, which drives into a route, which uses the controller to bind the data to the view and template. And all of these terms you really have to know to understand the Ember framework very well.
Interesting. So I see model, view, and controller. So essentially, you're looking at Ember as an MVC framework for the client.
That's correct. It's probably one of the most purest frameworks, MVC frameworks on JavaScript.
Interesting.
We'll get to that.
Cool. And in terms of now does this offer benefits in terms of enhancements for the user experience, faster load times, more intuitive UIs?
The single page application concept in itself does offer more performance, more. I sort of think of it as more of a rich user experience because you can do. You're not having to go to the server and have that 500 millisecond round trip for every single functionality that you want to do. So you can offer a lot of rich user experiences, but Ember out of the box doesn't do that for you. Really, the developer has to build that. It just gives you the sandbox to play in.
Cool. And for Angular and Backbone, would you guys say that's about the same kind of genre of what those frameworks offer?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess I'm talking about Backbone, huh? All right, let's go. Yeah, you got the little left and right arrows. So yeah, I thought it might be helpful to step back and just say why. Like if you're writing a mountain of just straight up functions and jQuery code, you're going to wind up with a giant mess pretty soon. So I think most of these frameworks are an attempt to address the hole you're about to dig yourself in with just a ball of functions and jQuery stuff all over the place. So Backbone has a slightly different philosophy from some of the other frameworks that are out there. I think a lot of them try to give you everything in the kitchen sink. Backbone tries to give you almost as little as possible. It's trying to stay out of your way. So that's just from the About Backbone part of the page. But that's it was sort of a thought idea to see what's the minimal amount of structure we could provide to give a client heavy web app some stuff. So if you go down, same kind of concepts that Tom talked about. You basically represent your objects with models, and then models down. We'll talk to collections. These are just a bunch of different models. And next one is views, pretty common. Next one, all right, we missed events. We have events. That's kind of a larger concept in Backbone that maybe takes a backseat in some of the other frameworks. All right, next. And we do have routing as well. So next slide, please. So again, the idea with Backbone is it's really not going to impose its worldview on you. You can use as much or as little of it as you want. It's very simple. Next one, that gives it a lot of flexibility. Next one, like I said, it really doesn't care about your templating engine or what your DOM library is. You can use jQuery or some of the other ones. I think that's been a big key to making it as popular as it has, and this slide will be shared. But if you hit that link, it takes you to all the folks that are using Backbone, and it's a lot of big shops: Trello, Basecamp, USA Today, Time, Spotify, Groupon. Like all these big guys are all big Backbone apps, and they may have other apps going on too. But I think it's really good when you're trying to take an existing code base and try and sort of morph it and give it some structure, as opposed to when you just have absolute greenfield development and you can just sort of create the app to suit the JavaScript framework, because you can sprinkle in just a little bit of Backbone here and there, and it plays really nicely with what you currently have going on. It even plays nicely with other frameworks, really. Okay, that's all I got.
Cool. Thanks, Jason. All right.
Yes.
Cool. So I guess I'm here to talk about Angular. I don't have any sweet GIFs like everyone else. GIF or GIF, whichever way. So Google explains Angular as HTML enhanced for web apps. So it's pretty simple. It's good to work with designers. You have your whole HTML laid out, and you just kind of sprinkle in some attributes and some elements that mean a lot of things. also has two-way data binding. So you say you have an object on the view and you have this controller behind it. They're always in sync, which is nice. Makes it very testable, very predictable. As you can see, it's very declarative syntax. In jQuery, you're always kind of laying events or on top of DOM elements, whereas Angular, you're saying that your class is going to be this if your model is in this state, which is very, very nice. You can always tell what it's going to be when you look at your template, which is cool. Directives, they're the main thing of Angular. We're going to go down a little bit. Directives, they're just a good way to encapsulate all that DOM logic, all those events, you're doing the add classes, all those nasty things that you see in the jQuery spaghetti code. You kind of put them in one place in a directive. Angular is pretty much all directives. You see the ng class in the last thing. Even the controller is a directive. It's not really as big a concept as directives. Directives are everything in Angular. Next one. So why Angular? Why Angular over Ember? Why Angular over Backbone? It's got a good separation of concerns. You know where the data is being manipulated from the back into the server all the way to the view. So if you know there's a problem with the data, it's probably in a service. If you know there's a problem with the events that are happening on the page, it's probably in a controller. If you know that there's a problem with the way it looks, it's probably in the view. So it's really good at finding these bugs and squashing them. Also, the community is great. There's full support for Bootstrap. They've pretty much rewritten Bootstrap in Angular, which is really nice. You'll always find a component for anything you need to do in Angular. Also, so if you're looking at a spectrum, Backbone's probably at the way into the spectrum for laissez-faire. You can do what you want. Ember's way over here saying, I'm going to take over your whole application. Angular's somewhere in the middle. It's kind of, you can sprinkle it in with your applications. If you are like me and you work with an existing application, you don't have a green field, maybe you just want to rewrite some pages in Angular, and that works really well. You know, if you've had an application that existed before 2010, you probably have jQuery everywhere. So it's good to wrap some jQuery components. It's great. And it scales well to a lot of developers. We have a nice build structure at Boomtown. And I don't know, we're able to work independently without stepping on each other's toes, which is nice. So what we've done recently at Boomtown is we've created this pattern library, which is just a bunch of directives, a bunch of guidelines for how you should build your application, so that we know we created something. It's great for other people to use it. They don't have to like sneak into our code and pull it out. They can just take our modules that we built and reuse them, which is great. I think that's all I really have for slides.
Cool. All right, so I think what we're going to do is we're just going to kind of go back and forth, banter a little bit between these different frameworks, and kind of judge what the difference is in terms of flexibility, ease of use, of course, the learning curve. So I'm kind of curious, how many people here actually have experience with a front-end framework like Backbone? Okay, so few. So there is a learning curve to this, and I think that it is a different concept in terms of how you build web applications, because you're really putting a lot of logic client side. And I think for a lot of us that have been doing this for a while, that's kind of a new concept. Is we're putting controller on the client, we're putting a route on the client, and I think that's kind of a hard concept to grasp. So learning curve, I think, is a really important thing, for people to get up to speed with these. But so you talked about integration with other libraries like jQuery. Okay, I'd like to hit on this a little bit because jQuery has really been in use for a while, and it almost seems like every web app has jQuery included in it. How do these frameworks, for example, Angular, you mentioned that it ties directly with the DOM and it keeps the controllers and DOM in sync, essentially, right? I guess what they call two-way binding.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Two-way data binding.
So how does jQuery, if you use jQuery to manipulate the DOM,
right?
Does that mess up Angular, or how does Angular handle jQuery?
So
you have to be careful.
Yeah, Angular really wants to keep all that DOM manipulation in one place, and that's in the directive. In the directive, you have access to the element that's kind of put on. So a directive may be an attribute, it may be your own element, like a web component type thing. So if you have a jQuery date picker, you can call date picker on the element. Now, you do have to monitor the events that jQuery wires up and then send them back to Angular so that Angular knows how to communicate. But it's still really easy to do as long as you have those events on those jQuery plugins. So you still have to do a little bit of work to wrap them up, Once you've done that, it's usable everywhere with everyone.
So you can wire jQuery to play well with Angular.
Sure, absolutely.
Okay. How about backbones? Oh, I'm sorry, back.
I was going to just ask, Mark, there's a subset of jQuery in Angular?
Yeah, it's called JQ Lite. So if you include jQuery on the page for Angular, Angular's cool with that. They'll use it. They have their own idea of an element that they pull in all the jQuery stuff. If you don't, they have JQ Lite, which is a lot of things that jQuery has, like add class, bind, event binding, stuff like that. It kind of replaces jQuery. So if you really feel like comfortable writing jQuery programming, it's fine to keep it in. If not, they've got something handled for you.
Oh, for Backbone.
Backbone hopes that you have some sort of DOM manipulation library, but it doesn't specify that it's jQuery. Now it needs to sort of look and feel like jQuery. So actually for my example app, I use something called Zepto, which is jQuery minus all the IE hacks. And it's a smaller, lighter version of it. So it will be looking for some sort of helper to start messing with the DOM. But it really doesn't have any particular ideas about how you should do that or how you should wrap anything. If you really, it's probably a pretty natural progression from a real jQuery heavy site, because it works very similar in that you sort of declare, when a click on this sort of thing happens, this is the function that I want you to run, and when this sort of thing happens. So it maps a little more to typical like jQuery JavaScript programming. When somebody clicks on something, I want you to add a class to this other thing or do this sort of thing. So it doesn't come with its own ideas about how to accomplish those things, and it doesn't really care how your markup looks or anything like that. You can bury it in JavaScript if you like, which is probably a bad idea, or you can have template files or something like that. It doesn't really have an opinion on how you do your views and your templates and stuff like that.
Okay. So would you say that overall Backbone has a little more of a simpler, I guess, feel in terms of how it integrates with the web page?
Yeah, I think so. And that simple can be a double-edged sword sometimes, because it doesn't give you a whole lot of guidance on how you should construct things. So like I said, it's philosophically, it's trying to do as little as possible for you. So if you want that guidance and that hand-holding, it will kind of leave you in the lurch. But if you're trying to sprinkle it in just enough and not have a framework impose its worldview on you, then it's nice because it doesn't.
And what about Ember? You said, I guess that's the other end of the spectrum, right?
Yeah, Ember is totally on the other side of that spectrum. That's extremely opinionated. It does require jQuery, so it will not work without jQuery, but it uses it as its underlying DOM engine. Most of the best practices is not to use jQuery directly as an Ember developer. It's to mainly use the data binding like Angular. And then instead of directives, it has a similar concept called a component. And it uses, and I think you can replace the template language, but again, it's strongly encouraged to use Handlebars, which is its template engine. And Handlebars has a whole construct of helpers, which drive the DOM and manipulate the DOM. So while jQuery is in there, it doesn't bubble up to the top for the web developer. It's sort of underneath the engine.
So the developer would include jQuery, but they would not actually use jQuery.
That's correct.
Okay. Interesting. Angular. You talked about directives.
Right.
You said directives are one of the core concepts of Angular.
Right.
Can you explain to us what is a directive?
So a directive is, at the very most bare minimum, reusable piece of code that you can sprinkle in your HTML. So we talked about in Backbone how you have this construct for adding a class to something, and if you click it, it adds a class, right? Well, that happens a lot. You have to write that code a lot when you're doing web stuff. So Angular wants you to write that once, generically, and then reuse it all over the place. So a directive, for example, in Angular would be ng-click, which says a user clicks this element, do this. So it's pretty easy way to make some reusable code that you can just use everywhere. Components like Ember, it's the same thing. Ember component's a isolate scope directive, if you want me to throw some vocabulary out there. Angular is very intense on vocabulary, and you have to get past that initial learning curve But once you're there, it's pretty zen.
And so does Ember also have, I guess, the concept of directives then, but they call them components? And how does that differ from Angular?
Yeah, so like Mark said, it's, say that again, isolate
scope.
So basically, I would say Angular allows a lot of configurability or flexibility to building directives. Ember takes the approach that we're going to give you the most commonly used case and remove the ability to configure. So basically, the component is set up to be one type of style, which uses isolate scope and transclusion and all of these fancy words, but basically it's just very opinionated. So you can create your own click event or create your own button component or any other component, and all you have to do is worry about naming it and attaching the JavaScript that it executes on the other side. So it's a very opinionated way to build components.
Okay. And I guess we'll see examples of directives when we see y'all's apps, right?
I didn't write any, but I am using some.
Okay, right. Okay, cool. Backbone. Are there directives in Backbone? Can you create your own?
Not at least according to that terminology, and I'm kind of curious to see what the code looks like for these other frameworks too, because I have very little experience with them. It kind of sounds like what they're talking about is this sort of event declaration that you do in a Backbone view, where you say, when these certain things happen, I want these other functions to run, and I want you to potentially manipulate parts of the web pages. So that might be kind of similar to the idea.
I think it's like the combination of the view and the model and Backbone.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So it's kind of interesting to see how we actually tie all this functionality of this JavaScript framework to the web page to make the web page do stuff, right? And so there's all these ways to make that tie together. And so from what I'm seeing in Angular is you actually do that, excuse me, in the HTML itself. Right, that's how you make that tie, that two-way binding, essentially. Cool. Okay, I want to talk about learning curves. All right, probably have some people here going, "Whoa, what is this stuff? What are they talking about?" And maybe they want to go home tonight, and try this out for themselves. And we'll start with Backbone, and I guess we'll work our way up the spectrum. Right. So for Backbone, what do you think is kind of learning curve? What would you tell people to focus on, or maybe some sort of core concept that can help them get that aha?
Models and views. I think that's kind of common to most of these frameworks, and as a programming concept, I think that's a pretty important concept to grasp, that you take the actual piece about your about the idea you're trying to represent, and you call that a model, and then the view is sort of the particular representation of a thing. Like, this is a whiteboard. A whiteboard would be a model. Now, this particular one might be like akin to a view. But if you can separate those two ideas out and keep your DOM stuff and the things that people interact with over here, and you can keep your idea and your business logic over here, keep those two separate, that goes a long way to maintaining any kind of program, really. Yeah. And that's kind of the central piece of Backbone, really. We've mentioned MVC before, and Backbone really is model, view, whatever. It doesn't have a real solid idea of how you should handle controllers or directives or all these other things, how to glue models and views up together. It pretty much leaves that to you to figure out. And so, like I said, that can kind of cut both ways. But those are the two key pieces to learn with Backbone.
Okay, interesting. So decoupling, separation of concerns, and that concept of MVC, right? Model view control.
So if you were starting from scratch, would you go with one of the other frameworks, or if you did build with Backbone, what reasons would you have to use Backbone?
I would probably do some Hello World apps and see how it feels. I mean, the nice thing about Backbone, especially as we're talking about learning curves, is 0 to 60 real fast, because there's not a whole lot to grasp, and it doesn't have the same level of terminology that you have to understand how all these sort of things work. It maps, I think, pretty closely to what you would normally do with jQuery. It's just a it's just sort of a rhyme and a reason to how you do a lot of this sort of work. So I think it's a lot closer to typical jQuery code than some of the other ideas. So like I said, it's hard to say without having done some Hello Worlds and stuff which one I'd go with now. We had this opportunity a while ago, and I went with Backbone because it seemed like it was easy and everybody would be able to grok it pretty quickly. And we also had existing code that we had to work with too. So
It sounds like that's the theme of your existing code that you're working with.
I mean, Angular plays nicely too. Angular seems to work in a nice self-contained fashion too.
Yeah, and so Angular, what core concepts would you tell people who are maybe going to do this for the first time?
Right. So Angular does have a learning curve. It's very clear, and directives are everything in Angular. But you don't need to learn it first. You can use the ones that they've built, which are pretty good. A lot of web apps, you're just adding and removing classes to things. So ng class has you covered. So if you learn the core things that Google has built, the core directives that they've built, you can get started pretty quickly.
Is there any sort of, I guess, what do you think is the most important core concept for somebody to, would you say a directive might be a good drill?
Directives, they're kind of tough at first, but they are the bread and butter of Angular. So.
Okay. And for Ember?
Yeah, so Ember has probably the steepest learning curve out of the three up front. It does take a lot to get going, and you really have to understand their philosophy, their approach. The biggest thing that you really need to learn that's probably a little bit different than Backbone or Angular is the concept of routes and its routing engine. It's very, very specific and very unique how it injects its route in the MVC structure. So that would probably be the first thing to really wrap your hands around is how it handles routes and how it handles state. And then the template engine is Handlebars, so that's a whole nother learning curve on itself if you're not familiar with template engines. And then the whole data side, they have a whole client library called Ember Data, which has it takes models and puts everything that you ever want to do with a model inside the data library. Of course, you don't have to use their Ember Data library. There's others that you can use, but that data side is where Backbone would be maybe a 2-hour read to grok models. Ember would probably take a couple of days to really get into what their data layer is all about and how it can interact with different server backends.
And so steeper learning curve, but at the end, do you say that development is more guided because Ember is so, what was the term you used? So opinionated, right?
Right. So the net of that is so since it's so opinionated, you have the majority of Ember developers using the exact same practices. So the main selling point of Ember is that it works really well with large teams. Large teams, multi-developers can work side by side without stepping on each other's toes. And the power of the community all solving sort of the same problems and only having to solve them once and not have to solve them every time you build an application is its big bread and butter.
Okay. Cool. Did you read? Okay, cool. All right, we'll look at code samples. Tom, is yours on your GitHub?
I've got them teed up. We'll see if.
Oh, there they are. Okay.
Yeah. Tom.
Yep.
All right, we'll jump to Backbone,
Okay.
and then I'll work on
All right, so this is the obviously the interface. I felt like being contrarian, and rather than write a to-do app, I wrote a to-don't app. So these are things that you shouldn't do. It's pretty basic. Type something in, and it adds into the list, to the trash can, and it deletes it. Check it off. and it will consider it done. This saved line here was just me showing you kind of what is going. I stuffed it all into local storage, so it's just showing you what is going into local storage, and then there's a handful of links to the couple things that I used under the hood, should you need some help. Should we go any farther than that? I'll give you an example. Check all of them off. That's okay. So, and then if you uncheck, it goes away. It's just an example of the eventing system that Backbone has. So, a to-don't is a model basically. That has a title and it has whether it's done or not. And then I have a collection of to-don'ts, which equals basically that list. And so I have set on the collection, when all of them are done, I want you to do this other thing. Here's an event that I want you to react to. And I want you to show that dirty dog message. So that's kind of a key, I guess, idea, especially with Backbone, is you have these pieces out there, but the conduit between them all is this event system. And so what you can say is when somebody clicks on the checkbox, I want the particular view for each line, I want it to react in some way. But then you can also have the collection itself say, when something has changed about one of these to-don'ts, I also want to react to that too. So you can basically have a few pieces of your system all reacting to events that are going on in there. So the event system is, it's kind of what's happening under the hood to help all of these guys out. And if we want to, I can show you how it all works in code if you want to pull that out. Hit index.html, if you will. See the second one down? Do they have a full screen? No. Or I'm sorry, not index.html. To-don't. I need the JavaScript file. To-don't.js. There you go. Okay. So here's my first model up as a to-don't, right? So in Backbone, here's how you say this is going to be a Backbone model. I kept it pretty lightweight. For the sake of brevity and this sort of thing, I didn't want to get really crazy on this app. But I have said here are some defaults. When you create a new to-don't, it's going to get these unless you tell me something else. The next item down the list is a collection of to-don'ts, right? So I'm extending Backbone's collection idea. And I'm saying that the model that you're going to base it off of is to-don't. And I want you to listen to all change and destroy events when it goes on. And when that happens, I want you to call this sync function down at the bottom. And what that's doing is saying anytime something like that happens, I want you to stuff it in local storage unless there are nothing. In that case, I want you to just blow local storage out the water. And then there were a couple helper functions that just say, how many are left? What's undone? What's been done? To-don't view, that's each individual line. That's the checkbox plus the text plus the trash can. And since I don't have an existing piece of DOM that I'm sort of binding to, I'm saying I want you to create a new list item. And so here's the tag name that I want you to use for what you're about to do. So there's a library that Backbone depends on under the hood called underscore, which is a really, really nice utility library. And it does some of the things that jQuery does, not in terms of DOM manipulation, but for like for each loops and helper, array helper, stuff like that. So anyways, it has a templating engine that just comes baked into underscore. So what I'm doing is just saying, let's use that as our templating system. And I could define any other type of templating system there if I wanted to. The next thing is an event hash. So because this is a list item of a particular piece of DOM, I'm saying here are some events that I want you to listen to. So this is real equivalent to like dollar input type equals checkbox dot click, and then you give it a function to run. It's the same sort of thing. I'm saying when somebody clicks on the checkbox, I want you to fire the toggle function. When they click on the A tag inside of there, I want you to fire the destroy function. Render is a convention with Backbone views, and it really just means take whatever model you've got and do whatever sort of templating work you have to do. And at the end, I'm going to expect some HTML to come out of that. And it will attach it to this upper level $EL element. And then toggle is where I'm saying if somebody clicked on the checkbox, then I want you to set the dirty dog flag on the model, right? So again, I'm setting an event, but as Backbone is doing that work, it's firing notifications out too, saying, hey, this thing just changed, does anybody care? And so pieces of the system can react and say, yeah, I do care about that. Destroy just means, just like it is, just go ahead and blow it out in the water. And then I created basically a top level view just to wrap the whole thing up. And I wanted to listen to when people are adding new to don'ts. And when that happens, I want you to fire the create function. And then here I'm just seeding it with some example stuff if we don't have anything. Otherwise, it's just going to pull it out of local storage and create new ones. But you see here I'm firing up this.don'ts equals a new to don't list. It's a new collection basically. And here I'm saying, for this collection, I want you to listen to add and destroy. And when that happens, I want you to fire render. And then when anything happens, I want you to fire this reckoning function. And then anytime something else happens, I want you to fire this meta function as well. So for 2 of the events, I only want to do register. For everything else, I want to fire these other things. So it's pretty easy to kind of glue up all the pieces of the system that you care about. That's pretty much it. And then I just fire up the view and we're off to the races.
Cool. Yeah. All right. Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, man. We'll do Angular.
I'll jump back out to
Oh no.
Okay. All right, it's just the color from down here. Okay, it's fine. Yeah, this is my to-do list. Similar concept. You enter in something you need to do, and you hit enter or click add to do. It's a form that will add a to do for you. So if you want to go into say, what do you need to do? Let's say win Fridays at the corridor.
It's fine.
Hit enter, and there it is. We can go ahead and check be awesome. We're done with that. All right. We don't need to learn React today. We're talking about other things, so let's exit that out. So similar, just to-do list. You can uncheck, recheck things.
So a very reactive app, but no server communication.
Yeah, nothing going on in the server right here.
Interesting.
Yeah, sure. Let's just pull this window down and kill the CSS. The CSS is the collapse icon next to last, I think. There we go. Okay, so you can see it's a layout. This is a template. This is where most of the things, the events are driven. At the top, you've got this ng app that's telling Angular to say, do all your stuff on this area of the page, which is, again, like how it's easy to integrate with Angular with other applications. You have a controller at the top right under it, and then under this, you kind of list out your to-dos, and then you kind of have classes saying, hey, it's either not done or done, and then you just kind of set the color, which is just a class based on the state of the current to-do. And here you have the check mark. If you click that, it wires up to a success function on the controller. Same with close, it just wires up to a remove. And you have a form down here. You have a submit on the form that just kind of hijacks the submit that you normally get on a web page that would call back to the server and calls a JavaScript function instead. You have input that has a model, so whenever you type in this model is being dynamically updated. If we were to put text below it, bound to that model, you'd see it happen on the page as you typed it. And then we just have a submit button, which isn't wired up to anything because the form is actually an Angular directive that monitors returns. Over on the right side in the controller, we kind of establish our to-dos. There's no real model in Angular, it's just plain old JavaScript objects. We have a remove function that removes it, marks success, sets it's done, and then either moves it to the top or the bottom based on if you've marked it done or not.
So in kind of a little more advanced concept, I think, but important nonetheless. So real quick, can you point out the directives? Where are the directives in your Angular?
Sure. Let's scroll up on this guy over here. ng repeats the directive. It says render this template, however many there are of this guy in this. ng class is a directive. You give it an object. It says if this is true, then add this class. If this is true, then add this class. So you can always tell based on your data what the state of this guy is. ng clicks a directive is just an event. ng submits a directive, forms a directive. ng controller is even a directive. So anything you see prefaced with ng is something that Google built. You can create your own directives. I could easily wrap this whole to-do right here in a to-do directive, and you just put to-do and you give it a model, and your template would be really small, and you'd encapsulate all that to-do stuff in one area, so you can reuse it.
So your directive is essentially your custom-built HTML attribute?
Yeah, it's an attribute, or you can create an element. So it's the idea of a web component or extending the functionality of HTML.
Very cool. And another thing too was everything that begins with a $sign.
Right.
What is that?
So
what's that called when you use?
So this is a bit of an advanced concept in Angular that I really want to get into, but dependency injection in Angular is you declare your dependencies, it goes and finds them and puts them in there. You don't really have to find it yourself. It's kind of a little magic. They do it weird two-string thing on the function. So $sign scope is how you communicate with a view. Anytime you see mark success, you can see it's on the scope here, scope.mark success. So this scope is just the way of communicating with your controller and your view so that you can access things on the view from your controller.
Cool.
I'm gonna kill this, right?
Okay, cool. So I think dependency injection is a really important concept for Angular.
Absolutely.
And I know that, for example, there's a mobile framework called Ionic, and they just released something called ng Cordova, which allows you to use dependency injection to essentially use native components on a mobile device, and you can just inject that functionality directly in your Angular controller, which is pretty interesting. So the whole concept of dependency injection, and now all these things, routes, dependency injection, all these things that were, such server-side technologies are now going client-side in these JavaScript frameworks. And I think we're going to move on to Ember. But does Ember have a similar concept, Tom?
To dependency injection?
Yeah.
It actually leans more on routes and controllers to glue the model and view. So your controller is where you would put all of your presentation code, and then in the route you point to the model. So it doesn't really have this concept of dependency injection. It's sort of it handles things in a more traditional aspect, very much to like a Rails or Django handles model view controller. So in the To-Do app, if you go in, this is all style based off of To-Do MVC. And if you want to see all of these frameworks plus about 18 others, go to todomvc.com and you can compare them, all trying to do the same app. So if you type in hello world, and then hit enter, and then type in like goodbye moon, and hit enter, and then make hello world complete. Just check it.
Oh. Nice.
So one of the key, this is pretty much doing exactly what Backbone and exactly what Angular is doing, but one of the key things that is a little bit different, if you click on the active link at the bottom, you can see that link actually change the URL up at the top to active. And if you click on the completed, you can see that the link completed. So if I copy that URL and email it to you, Chad, and you click on the link in your email, you're going to come exactly to this state, this view. So that's one of the things that Ember really sort of pushes out there, is every single click, every single state change, they want it to be represented in the URL so that you always have control of your back button and you always have this concept of shareable state to other people.
Very cool.
Makes sense.
Yeah, and so I know for Angular, the router that comes standard with Angular, I don't think really supports states like that. So I think they have another Angular add-on, right?
Yeah, there's the team called Angular UI, and they've created their own UI router, which is pretty good. There's some bugs that I've spent some frustrating days with, and I will say I'm in love with Ember's router. I think it's fantastic.
Cool.
But yeah, Angular has similar concepts. It's just a little bit more work.
Okay. Cool. All right. So we're going to go ahead. I think we're almost out of time. We have a few minutes for Q&A, and then. Okay. All right. We do it. Yeah.
I have a question. I want to have a comment on Angular. I think it's worth pointing out that it was originally more of an MVC framework, but they've moved more to the MVVM, so model view model layout. So in that case, that dollar scope is the view model, and you're kind of decorating it with the function that you call a controller. That was probably the biggest learning curve piece for me to get over. Going from a strictly MVC background and having to learn Angular. So I think that's just worth pointing out. Angular actually has a really funny post. They actually call it an MVW framework now, and that stands for model view whatever. And it's simply because they just want you to use it to build whatever and however you need to do it. So I think that's a very flexible approach that they've taken, which is interesting.
Very cool. So the real question is, which one of these work best for a mobile view?
In my opinion, I think Ember is really too heavy for mobile because you're bringing jQuery, you're bringing handlebars, you're bringing about 200K of stuff. Now, if you're building a huge mobile app, you probably could make a case for that using Cordova. You could package it up, but in my opinion, Angular with the Ionic framework that Chad mentioned is probably the best all-in-all use case for mobile apps with JavaScript.
I'd say React. If I can preach about React a little bit here, it's outside of the frameworks, but it's just really the view it takes over, and their goal was to get 60 frames per second on a non-JIT iPhone. So like Chrome, if you're using it, it's not using the super fast JavaScript engine that Safari is. That's changing this fall, but they get 60 frames per second, which is just amazing. It's a great framework.
Yeah, and I mean, I'll toot Backbone's own horn because it's so small, and it can be really lightweight, and it doesn't even dog your HTML up in any way. I mean, if you really wanted to cut it to the bone, something like Zepto and Backbone would be up there with some of the smaller deliveries you could do in terms of like overall JavaScript and HTML payload that you could accomplish.
There's a slide in my deck that compares like 8 or 9 frameworks on benchmarks, and it really goes through and does Backbone's benchmark of creating 100 models and manipulating them. So I would recommend take a look at that. You can see how they all compare. Again, benchmarks are benchmarks, but it compares Safari 7, it compares Firefox and Chrome.
Tom, is it on one of the?
Probably that view.
One more, go back. That, yeah. And just scroll down. So that really can give you a starting point to an idea of comparing.
Is there any other questions?
Yeah. Any of these systems have model mapping? Because ultimately, most applications need to get the data up to a server. Do you have to maintain 2 models, or is there some mechanism for that?
I think with Ember, it's yes, you have to specify the model and its attributes on the client, and then if you're connected to a server backend, you would have to do the same there. There are folks that's done some work to try to make that the exact same code using Node.js, but for the most part, you would have to do that, but it does come with a REST adapter. So if you use REST standards, it's pretty straightforward.
Angular has a similar REST adapter, but it's not really good with models. It's just using plain old JavaScript objects. We call them POJOs in the Angular community. So you do have to do a little bit of manual work there maintaining your model. But
Backbone's fairly nice on that front because when you create a new model, it just expects you to throw out a hash. And that plays really nicely with Rails and any framework basically where you can just plop out some JSON on the page. So you can either request JSON or just spit it out on the page and sort of hydrate your model right off the JSON. But there are no special hoops that you have to jump through to do that. You can either just throw it the hash right there or have it phone home and expect a hunk of JSON to come back, and you have a model at that point.
I was wondering what, maybe just for a list of frameworks / tools that it works well with and that it doesn't work well with, like, you know, if you're using Coffee or Haml or a framework like Bootstrap or Foundation, you know, what should you avoid plugging together, and what would work well together?
Yeah, Ember works well with Foundation or Bootstrap. One of the core developers, Yehuda Katz, is on the Rails core development team. So Ember really works great with Rails backend as a service and other backends. I think the one thing with Ember is sort of like, you know, you have to commit to Ember. So you can't. You would really be working against Ember to try to say, let me use a little bit of Ember here, a little bit of Backbone here, a little bit of Angular here. You would really be killing yourself. So you sort of have to commit. Once you go Ember, you don't go back, right?
Angular, similar. It works well with a lot of things. It does own the piece of the application that it's in. So if you need to touch something with another eventing system, don't do that. That's bad. It's fantastic with Bootstrap, though. The Angular Bootstrap library is just top-notch, and there's a competing one called AngularStrap that's even better. So I don't know much about how it integrates with Foundation, but that'd be interesting to see.
Yeah, I mean, Backbone wouldn't have any problem with any of those guys because it really doesn't have an opinion about how your markup should look or what CSS framework you use or anything like that. What we use at Boomtown is Backbone and Bootstrap together.
One additional note for Angular is that Foundation, the developers of Foundation, are launching a Angular plugin in the next month or so for their next version of Foundation. So they're really embracing Angular.
That's great.
Yeah, I have a question about, I guess, Angular and how some of the other frameworks would interact with. Like if I want to minify my application with Angular, if I define my variables a certain way, it's going to blow up,
right.
And you probably experienced that. Are there any, with like some of the other frameworks, are there some things that I need to know going in, some conventions I need to follow to, if I want to play with Ember, for instance, do I need to look out for something? Because later when I want to put it in production, I need to have, you know, abided by this convention to avoid these pitfalls like, you know, Angular and naming or defining your variables so that you don't minify and screw up your application when you put it in production.
Absolutely. Angular is great with build systems. So if you use Grunt or Gulp, any of those like node build systems, the problem you're talking about can be solved by the ng-min build step. It's built by a guy who was an intern and now works on the Angular team at Google.
Gotcha. Yeah.
If you run that, I had a problem with my templates caching aggressively on the server, so if I update a template, it wouldn't update. So there's a ng templates build step that just takes your HTML, minifies it, puts in a string, throws in your template cache, so whenever Angular looks for it, it's actually just grabbing what you've already put in an object in JavaScript. So it works really well with a build system. I actually recommend a build system for any serious project with JavaScript.
Yeah.
You lose that immediate like save and it's there, but your build system can be fast enough to make that seamless.
And so the build system you're suggesting is called?
Both Grunt and Gulp are pretty solid. Gulp's a little bit of a, it's more going to be programming JavaScript. Grunt's going to be a bunch of configuration files.
Okay.
So.
Ember has its own sort of CLI build tool, and then I think there's some Yeoman generators that help with that as well. But I would recommend to go to Ember's guides on the Ember.js site, and they've got probably some of the best getting started documentation I've seen for JavaScript framework. So go to the guides and just work through that, and literally all of those questions and answers are there. And then if you really are stuck, they're probably one of the most super responsive communities on their IRC or Twitter or any other social media communication platform.
All right. Thanks, guys. Well, I think we're going to wrap this up, but I do think we should declare a winner, which I think we already have, Jeremy. Declared a winner for us. Thanks, buddy. React won the Ember versus Angular versus Backbone debate, but I don't know. Do we just want to do a quick show of hands, maybe, for Backbone? Show of hands. Anybody like Backbone? Gonna try it? Yeah, a couple. Awesome. All right. For Angular, a few more, and for Ember. Oh man, I think anyone won on this one. All right, cool. There can be only one. So.
Is there really, a better one though? I mean, I'm curious from the panelists. I mean, I know you're here to represent a specific one, but would you say there's,
They're popping up every day.
Yeah.
I love all JavaScript frameworks. I think we're all working towards a common goal. We're going to get to this one framework that's going to do everything right. Unless you're using Polymer, then just get out.
Is there any other one besides React to keep your eyes out for?
I think you are big on Vue, right?
Yeah, as far as, again, if you're not doing anything super huge and you want to just get a small app, Vue, VUE is pretty neat. It's sort of like a micro Angular. It's Angular without dependency injection and all of those opinions. It's built with the same sort of philosophy as React as well.
Well, thanks to our panelists. We appreciate your time, and thanks for coming out. Next month, we're back to a business or a founder talk. We've got the founder of ISI, Jerry Callahan. He was formerly the founder of Blue Rhino, which are those tanks you see at the gas station. He started, raised capital, sold that, and then was doing it all over again with Heatworks with the ISI. And he just got second in April in TechCrunch for his new invention. So he'll be speaking next month. And then August, we'll be discussing quality of your code, and testing, and code testing. So QA testing, unit testing. So back with the code talk. And because of popular demand, code talks will probably be every other month versus every third month. So if you want to see your next one, August will be October. So give me your thoughts, ideas on the next code talk. Thanks, guys.